From Pennywise to Freddy Krueger, pop culture is filled with some intriguing villains who have made their way into the mainstream media. These characters are so popular that we often see people cosplay them on Halloween, but they're not the only horror villains that have left a mark on viewers. Some other villains, such as the Creeper or Otis Driftwood, have insane lore as well, but then again, they've been forgotten over time despite their insane backstories. Today, we'll take a deep dive into the top 10 forgotten horror villains of all time and take you through their story arcs. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
For you, for a very long time.
The Tall Man, Phantasm. Portrayed by the late Angus Scrimm, the Tall Man was the main antagonist of the Phantasm series, and he was essentially a towering, white-haired man known for taking great pleasure in torturing and killing his victims. He had a taciturn personality and was an immortal mastermind who typically kept to himself and used nonverbal cues, such as raising his eyebrows or making faces to communicate his thoughts. He was always spotted in a black tuxedo, but at one point, he was known as a kind-hearted mortician known as Dr. Jebediah Morningside. He worked as a medic for the Union Army during the American Civil War when he first started experimenting with interdimensional travel and looked into the mysteries of death. He was determined to attain immortality and also invent a machine that helped him travel from one world to another, and he was quite successful in this endeavor. However, he turned into a calculated evil being after traveling from a faraway dimension, and it was suggested that his body was either possessed by extraterrestrial beings or that his experiences had changed him radically. He soon started killing people to expand his undead army, and he even dug out corpses from mortuaries and graveyards in his own endeavors to become the Lord of the Dead. It was not long before he had an army of undead minions, and he also invented Sentinel Spheres, a gadget that compacted a human body and then placed the brains in metal casings, which soon became his signature weapons against humankind. While he continued to expand his army, the Tall Man was determined to travel across more worlds and expand his occult knowledge, and he was careful to stay under the radar while doing so. Anyone who stumbled upon him would have assumed that he was polite, only for him to take them by surprise by revealing his true sadistic nature. He was also blessed with abilities such as telekinesis, superhuman strength, and psychic control, which allowed him to exert complete power over his undead troops. Dr. Fibes, the Abominable Dr. Fibes. Introduced as a titular antagonist of The Abominable Dr. Fibes, this character was essentially a mad scientist portrayed by Vincent Price. Dr. Fibes was essentially a brilliant but insane individual who was driven by his schemes to torture his victims on the basis of the 10 plagues of ancient Egypt. The movie kicks off on a funky note where our titular villain makes a dramatic entrance with his assistant, Volnavia, and soon creeps along a roof to sneak into Dr. Dunwoody's house. He then released a flock of vampire bats in his room to kill him, and even the police had no idea how or why someone would kill Dunwoody in such a creative, baffling way. As the story progresses, Fibes kills Dr. Hargreaves by asking him to wear a plaster frog's mask during a party and then watching him as the mask tightens around his skull and crushes it into pieces. This was only the start of his murder spree, and his third victim was Dr. Longstreet. Fibes gifted him a container of film, and the doctor played it on his television to discover that it was about a snake charmer. While Longstreet enjoyed the movie, Fibes sneaked into his den with his assistant and hooked him up to a catheter before draining his blood into 8 glass jars. As Fibes continued to terrorize his victims, the police studied the pattern and realized that he was killing people using the themes from the 10 Egyptian plagues, which included blood, frogs, gnats, flies, livestock, boils, hailstorm, locusts, darkness, and finally, the death of the firstborn son. As the plot continued, Fibes managed to kill many more doctors by using these objects in torturous ways to claim his victims' lives, before finally targeting Dr. Vesalius' son, Lem. At this point, the police also narrowed things down and kept a keen eye on Lem as they expected Fibes to go after him and kill him. While the police managed to disrupt his mission, Dr. Fibes left Lem and Vesalius to their fate and rushed to a secret room in his mansion. As it turned out, he had stored his wife's remains in this room, and he finally even claimed his own life by getting inside a custom-made sarcophagus and using a catheter to swap out his blood for embalming fluid. As he lay next to his wife, he fulfilled the 10th and last plague of darkness by slowly succumbing to death. The Creeper, Jeepers Creepers. Portrayed by Jonathan Breck, the Creeper was the titular antagonist of the Jeepers Creepers horror film franchise, who returned every 23rd spring to feed on human beings. While the Creeper was an ancient demon, his bloodlust could not be satiated until he fed on human body parts every 23 years to remain invincible. He often wore an old trench coat and a hat, and he had reptilian green skin, yellow fangs, and wispy white hair. He also had a bunch of thin appendages on the top of his head, and he first made an appearance when Trish and Derry Jenners accidentally discovered his base and came across hundreds of dead bodies sewn together in a cavern underneath a church. While they summoned the cops, a local psychic named Giselle approached them and warned them that they were in danger after discovering the Creeper's house of pain. As the movie progresses, the Creeper decides to go after Trish and Derry for all the trouble they had caused him, especially since they had led the cops to his lair. In the meantime, Giselle warned them and even stuck by their side while the Creeper made his way to them. Even though the cops were on his toes, the Creeper managed to get his hands on Derry and even ripped his eyes out before sewing the back of his head again. While he left him behind as a motionless corpse, we learned that the Creeper had replaced his eyes with Derry's before setting out to hunt more victims. Belial, Basket Case. Introduced as a violent and misshapen freak, Belial was the main antagonist of the comedy horror trilogy Basket Case. While he was initially the conjoined twin of Dwayne Bradley, the two were separated early on, and they had turned to insanity in their mission to reattach themselves and become whole again. Throughout the movie, Belial is determined to get revenge on the doctors who separated him from his twin before moving forward and ruling the world with other deformed freaks. He was known for traveling in a locked basket while his brother carried him around, but their shared goals were soon thrown out the window after Dwayne fell for a nurse named Sharon. An enraged Belial kidnapped and even attempted to assault her, while Dwayne tried to kill Belial in retaliation for his actions. While the first movie ended with the brothers tumbling out of the window while fighting each other, the following movies revealed that they had survived and continued their attempts to reconnect. Mr. Slawson, Tourist Trap. Portrayed by Chuck Connors, Mr. Slawson was the main antagonist of the 1979 horror movie Tourist Trap. He was essentially a telekinetic man with a multiple personality disorder, which drove him to kidnap people and turn them into his puppets. While very little is known about him, he had psychic abilities that enabled him to manipulate his victims, and he spent his early life married to a woman who cheated on him with his brother. His anger soon turned into a psychotic rage, and he murdered them both before feeling riddled with guilt. He rushed to put their bodies back together by turning them into sculptures, which is how he got obsessed with turning his victims into puppets. During the events of Tourist Trap, a bunch of kids find themselves on the highway when Mr. Slawson talks them into visiting his place, the Lost Oasis. Soon enough, he kills one of the boys with his telekinesis before asking the women to come in and even advising them against stepping out. As the film progressed, he kills them one by impaling them with pipes, knives, or even suffocating them to death before turning them into puppets. However, a distracted Slawson started dancing with his wife's sculpture when one of the kids named Molly snuck up on him and even killed him with an axe before escaping with the mannequin versions of her friends.
I'm the one who brings the devil's brandy.
Who is your daddy?
Otis Driftwood, House of 1000 Corpses. Born on December 23, 1929, Otis Driftwood had a tragic story arc in House of 1000 Corpses and the Devil's Rejects, and he was not even given a name at birth. Neglected by his parents, Otis practically raised himself and grew up to be a troubled teenager who murdered his parents and then traveled all over the country on his own. He eventually found himself in Rugsville, Texas, where he made friends with Cutter and even moved in with his family, including his girlfriend and kids. A few years down the line, Otis took Cutter's daughter, Baby, under his wing, and they killed people together in a series of murders known as the Son of Satan murder. While Baby eventually returned to her family, Otis continued to commit crimes and even traveled all across the country on a killing spree before eventually returning to Rugsville. While he reunited with the family, Otis and Baby got involved in a satanic cult in the late 1970s, but they were kicked out after Otis stabbed another cult cult member. During the movie, we learned that Otis was the most aggressive member of the family, but he was also quite loyal to them and tried to remain in their good books even if he bickered with them. On the other side, he continued to claim many lives and even called himself a revolutionary and a sadist who would carve sculptures out of his victims or skin them in order to make a suit. In one such instance, Otis hosted 4 young adults in their home after their tire was shot during Halloween, and he soon took this opportunity to torture them mentally and physically. He killed one of these boys and turned him into a sculpture known as Fish Boy before showing it off to the boy's girlfriend, and even flaunted the skin of one of his victim's father in front of the dead man's daughter. As part of a satanic ritual, Otis even dressed 2 of his victims as rabbits and then allowed Baby to kill them when they tried to escape. While this movie ended on a cliffhanger after one of the protagonists escaped only to be captured again, Otis later appeared in the sequel, The Devil's Rejects, where his character was drastically altered.
The healing pains are twice as intense.
Dr. Joseph Heiter, the Human Centipede. Portrayed by the late Dieter Lasser, Dr. Joseph Heiter was the main antagonist of the Human Centipede, the first sequence. However, most of his backstory was established prior to the events of the film, wherein he was a well-skilled surgeon. He especially rose in popularity after separating Siamese twins, but he eventually had a vision that told him to create a Siamese person instead of separating them. After he retired, he experimented on his Rottweilers to create a Siamese triplet, but this was a colossal failure, especially since the dogs died soon after the procedure. After their death, he had another dream where he connected people by linking their digestive tracts, which gave him the idea of creating a human centipede. Soon enough, he started working on this vision by kidnapping a truck driver and then 2 more girls before drugging them and storing them in his basement. When the truck driver's blood did not match, he killed him and buried him in his backyard before kidnapping a Japanese tourist and then proceeding with his operation to link them from the mouth to the anus. Even though his victims protested in pain, Heiter continued with his operation and was quite pleased with the final result. He decided to keep the human centipede as his pet and even train them, but his victims resisted his attempts, while the police also started looking into the disappearances. Heiter decided that he must kidnap the 2 detectives, Kranz and Voller, and then add them to his human centipede to ensure that they don't catch him. But the detectives were already far too suspicious of his behavior.
Things in there.
Looks like a bomb dropped.
You got any beer?
Julia Cotton, Hellraiser. Introduced as Kirsty Cotton's stepmother, Julia Cotton was a major antagonist portrayed by Claire Higgins in the Hellraiser franchise. While she was married to Larry, she seemed to regret her marriage and often spent time with Larry's brother, Frank, before his unfortunate death at the hands of the Cenobite. However, Frank soon managed to return from hell in a skinless form and approached Julia for her help in securing more human blood so that he could regain his usual appearance. As the movie progressed, Julia managed to trap at least 3 men, while Frank lived in the attic and fed on their blood to become stronger. This went on for quite some time until Kirsty stumbled upon them, but it was already too late to get any help. While Julia murdered her husband and finally helped Frank wear his skin, Frank decided that he would rather be with young Kirsty, and he stabbed Julia. By the end of the first movie, he left Julia at the mercy of the Cenobites, but she soon reappeared as an antagonist in Hellbound Hellraiser 2, wherein she worked with Dr. Philip Chenard. Chenard would often leave out his insane patients for her, and she would feed on their blood to regain her strength. After seducing Dr. McRae and drinking her blood, Julia was whole again, and she then tricked Chenard by using him as a sacrifice to the Leviathan. She was also determined to get her hands on Kirsty for revenge, and she at least managed to kill Frank before she was sucked back into hell. Rawhead Rex. Rawhead Rex. Introduced as the main antagonist of Clive Barker's horror novel and subsequent fantasy film adaptation, Rawhead Rex was the ancient demigod of malevolence. He was known for having an insatiable thirst for blood, and he often committed atrocities such as feeding on children or assaulting young women. He was portrayed by Heinrich von Schellendorf, and he was a sadistic 9-foot-tall monster with a face shaped like raw meat and sharp teeth. These features earned him the name Rawhead Rex, but his movie counterpart was way shorter, with an ogre-like appearance. His body was covered in armor, except for an exposed chest, and he also had a thick mohawk, red eyes, and sharp teeth that helped him feed on his victims. Rawhead Rex was essentially a representation of the human sex drive, but these sexual features were quite toned down in the film. Instead, he was introduced as a monster who lurked in the small English town called Zeal and often fed on local children and subjected the town's women to unwanted pregnancies. He was typically drawn towards pregnant or menstruating women, but the townsfolk eventually got rid of him by trapping him at a burial site. While he was confined for endless centuries, a farmer accidentally released him, and Rawhead Rex once again emerged to create chaos all over town. His bloodlust had been enhanced beyond measure, and he also had a newfound sense of brutality that drove him to destroy a farm, cut off a police officer's manhood, and even set him ablaze before finally killing the town vicar. At this point, he had corrupted a local verger into becoming an accomplice, and he killed many locals in a fit of rage while the surviving citizens cowered in fear and despair. However, one of the locals named Howard discovered Rex's weakness as a symbol of femininity and motherhood, especially after Rex murdered Howard's child right in front of his eyes. Even though he was still grieving, Howard worked up the courage to lure Rex into a trap and finally defeat him by exposing him to the symbol and striking him down once and for all. Samara Morgan, The Ring. Introduced as a withdrawn, pretty young woman, Samara Morgan had fair skin and flowing brown hair and was typically seen wearing a white nightgown until she died and returned as a ghost. In this form, Samara resembled a Japanese onryo, or a spirit of vengeance, and she was characterized by soaking wet black hair and a deformed face with gray and moldy skin. Her white nightgown had also turned into a brownish gray shade, and she was portrayed by Davy Chase in The Ring, while Kelly Stables and Bonnie Morgan played this role in later releases. The movie started with Samara's mother, Evelyn Osorio, who was captured and assaulted by a priest named Burke, who got her pregnant and continued to keep her in his captivity. Eventually, Evelyn managed to escape and run away to a Christian hospital to give birth to Samara, who was born with supernatural abilities. It seemed like she was blessed with a demonic spirit, and she often complained about hearing evil spirits in her head. Finally, Evelyn decided that the only way to get rid of these voices would be by drowning Samara in the water, but a bunch of nuns stopped her and took Samara away. While they locked Evelyn up, Samara was raised in an orphanage until Anna and Richard Morgan took her in and raised her on Mosko Island. As she grew, she gained new powers and struggled to keep them under control, which then earned her a reputation as the town freak. The island's population blamed her for any freak accidents or calamities, and she eventually thought of herself as the human incarnation of a sea demon. While she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, she was also blamed for her doctor's death, and Samara's father then decided to take things into his own hands. He locked her up in their barn with nothing but a television set to keep her occupied, but she soon ended up in a fit of psychotic rage and drove all the barn horses to jump off a nearby cliff. While the horses' mass suicide took the entire town by surprise, Anna trapped Samara in a well and then committed suicide herself, leaving only Richard behind. Much to everyone's surprise, Samara's death did not prevent her from coming back, and she soon returned in a ghost form to torment the entire town. She ended up using her psychic powers to create a cursed videotape that killed anyone who watched it, and the only way to bypass her curse was by passing along the tape to someone within 7 days. Marvelous verdict. And with that, we have explored some of the most iconic horror villains of all time, ranging from Mr. Slawson and Rawhead Rex to Julia Cotton and Dr. Fibes. There is no doubt that these characters have insane lore, and their origins and backstories are nothing short of a horror story in themselves. We hope you enjoyed exploring them with us, and we would love to hear your favorite picks from this list in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe, and thanks everyone.